Every day we slaughter 900,000 cows, 1.4 million goats, 1.7 million sheep, 3.8 million pigs, and by the way, these numbers are pale in significance to chickens, which is 202 million chickens. That's just per day.
Jordan, what if I told you there's a climate fix that's around 28 times more powerful than cutting carbon dioxide? Would you believe me?
I mean, I would believe you, but I'd want to know more.
Well, buckle up, because we're going to meet the gas that might just buy us time. Methane.
From the BBC World Service, I'm Jordan Dunbar.
And I'm Greer Jackson, and this is The Climate Question. And this week, we're asking, is tackling methane the fastest way to cool the planet? Jordan, we've talked about methane before. Do you remember?
Yes, we did a programme looking at 3 potential easy-ish, quick-win climate solutions, and it was one of those.
Yes, it was transport, infrastructure and methane, as you've just said. And you were in charge of pitching transport as the best solution.
Yeah, you made me transport minister, so I was pitching faster buses and more cycling and walking and looking at climate emissions around those.
And our wonderful audience came back with a wonderful response. There were thousands of them. So thank you so much for sending those through. And I can now reveal, Jordan, that you were the winner.
Okay.
Transport won.
Right. What prize? I fear to ask. What have I won?
You get to make a programme all about transport next month. Aren't you lucky?
More work. Yes. No, I do actually. I look forward to that.
But methane got loads and loads of comments and questions. And that's why today we wanted to make a programme answering those comments and questions.
And to help us do that, we have a top climate expert with us. He is Professor of Earth System Sciences at University College London and also author of the book How to Save Our Planet. It's Mark Maslin. Hello, Mark.
Hi, thank you very much for having me on the show.
It's really great to meet you. So we've got a couple of comments. I'm just going to read them to you. There's one from Finn Barrion on YouTube who wrote, "The best quick fix is methane." Another wrote, "I have the correct answer, though I cheated using artificial intelligence. Cuts to methane in food and farming are the best short-term impact." Are they right, Mark?
Well, I have to say I agree with Finn, but they're not the fix. So methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, and it's important that we deal with that as quick as possible. Not because it solves climate change, it's because it gives us some breathing space. Because it's so powerful, if we can limit that, it then gives us time to actually remove carbon dioxide. Because think what we're trying to do. We're trying to take a whole global economic system that is driven by fossil fuels. 80% of our energy is still produced from fossil fuels. We're trying to move that 19th century technology into the 21st century and actually generate all our energy as electricity because it's so much more efficient. That takes time, it takes effort, and it takes a lot of money. So by reducing methane emissions now, that can give us a little bit of breathing space so we can shift the whole of the global economy.
I mean, we talk about carbon dioxide so often. Why is methane so powerful? What is it about it that gives us this breathing space?
So it's all about the actual molecule. So you have a carbon and then you have 4 hydrogen molecules attached to it. And it means it can shake, rattle and roll. It basically has lots of vibration. So when you have infrared or heat energy being released by the Earth from the sun, that actually is trapped by the methane, and the methane vibrates and holds that for longer than a carbon dioxide molecule, and that heats up the atmosphere.
And what is it about methane that can deliver results so quickly?
So I think methane is important because it is a short-term pollutant. It only spends about 10 to 12 years in the atmosphere and then it's oxidized. And we know where the sources are. So it's actually really easy to target some of those to stop the methane being produced. And to give you an idea, the warming potential of a methane molecule is 28 times that of a carbon dioxide. So if we cut methane, say, to 0 now, what would happen is the rate of warming would slow down. Now, the warming would still increase because we're still pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So yes, it can have a significant effect, but again, only if we reduce carbon dioxide as well. So it's no good getting rid of the whole methane emissions if we don't deal with CO2. So it is a short-term fix. As your listeners actually said, it's a short-term fix to allow us to actually then deal with the real underlying problem, which is we're burning fossil fuels to create energy around the world.
Okay, well, according to the UN's Global Methane Status Report 2025, the three biggest sources of human-made methane are, in order, agriculture, energy, and waste. Agriculture is responsible for 42% of human-made methane emissions. The biggest chunk by far is from meat and dairy production. Why?
So this is enteric fermentation, which is basically cows and goats and sheep that basically eat grass and then ferment it in their gut. And guess what? They burp and fart, if I'm allowed to say that on the BBC, methane. And there are huge numbers. So let's just go through the numbers. So there are 1.5 to 1.7 billion cows in the world. There's 1 billion goats, and there's about 1.1 to 1.2 billion sheep. That's a lot of methane producing animals.
So it is the sheer numbers of animals that is the problem in terms of this enteric fermentation. There's so many of them, they're pumping out so much.
Oh, absolutely. So it's again, because we have moved into this meat, I would say, obsessed world where everybody now to feel that they are in a developed society has to eat meat. We have huge numbers. If you think about it, that's something like 3.5 to 4 billion animals in the world at this moment in time. So that's half the number of humans who are just producing methane every single day.
Presumably we also produce methane as well, don't we, Mark?
Actually, a lot less because it depends on what you eat. So let's not go into that. But no, compared with the fermentation. So it's really because what they do is in their gut, they don't break down the grass by normal mechanical means. They actually just let it ferment and rot in their gut. So what they're doing is they basically have a rotting system, and therefore that's why there's methane, because there's no oxygen in their stomachs.
Do we know how the numbers compare? Because Joey Hanst wrote on YouTube, I'll give you the precise quote, "The BBC is throwing in farming as a cause when there's less bovine animals, so cows, in the world now than in recorded history." So what does the evidence say? Are there fewer cows and ruminant sheep, goats than there have been before?
No. So I hate to disagree because what we've seen is as the global population has increased, we're now at about 8.1, 8.2 billion people on the planet. So has the number of animals that we need to feed that. And let's do some stats, okay? Because I think these are the things that will shock your listeners. Every day we slaughter 900,000 cows, 1.4 million goats, 1.7 million sheep, 3.8 million pigs, and by the way, these numbers are pale in significance to chickens, which is 202 million chickens. That's just per day.
Wow.
So again, we have increased the number of animals on the on the land to feed that growing population and that demand for meat, because as countries and people become wealthier, again, it's seen as a status symbol. And it's only when you get to, say, UK, you're finding that the new generation are going, meat, unhealthy, and actually are moving much more to a plant-based diet. So it's that developmental arc, which is the first thing you do when you get a bit of money, etc. You then treat yourself to meat. And then as you go up the development, then you suddenly go, hang on, this is not good for me to eat meat every single day. And so people are in very developed countries are shifting away from meat.
You said developed country. What about developing countries?
So the problem here is that in developing countries, a lot of people are still lack calories. Okay. And so we have this world where there are 1 billion people that still don't have access to clean drinking water. We have 750 million people that go to bed feeling hungry every night. they're on the part of starvation. And the problem here is that sometimes, yes, the easiest way to get calories to people in an efficient way can be meat. So therefore, we can't in the West be prescriptive and go, yes, we're going to give up meat and so should everybody else. It's about balancing that out. And then as these countries and people are lifted out of poverty, making sure that they don't go into the obesity race that we're all in, that they move into much healthier diets. So they're getting the calories, they're getting the nutrition, but they're not overeating with calories, and they're not getting all that super highly processed food, which is then going to shift them in the opposite direction like we are, where we have an obesity epidemic.
But I do want to move us on because we had loads of comments on what would happen to pasture lands if there was less animal agriculture. So Prometheus wrote, we should be replacing pastures with edible forests, which would increase biodiversity as well as reducing climate change. So if there was a pasture land decline, would the land for crops increase, and could that lead for deforestation?
So the key thing here is that meat production is an incredibly inefficient use of land. Okay, so it is 10 times the amount of land you need to produce a kilo of beef as a kilo of rice. Okay, so what you do is if you actually reduce the amount of meat that we produce around the world, that frees up a lot of land. Firstly, a lot of that land's been deforested in the first place to actually allow cattle. So guess what? We allow that to reforest. We help it, we plant forests, and that helps suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. Tick. The other land we then repurpose for using for crops. Okay, so we still need to produce enough food for 8.2 billion. Now, interestingly enough, we produce enough food to feed 10 billion. Yeah. But it's not distributed. That's why we have about 750 million people on the brink of starvation. Because it's all about money and it's all about who can afford food. So again, it's about repurposing that land to help the planet, both to reforest and rewild, because sometimes it's not the right thing to plant trees, as you two who love bogs and wetlands know.
Keep that to yourself.
Okay, I won't tell anybody. Again, sometimes what you want to do is rewild, not reforest. So you have to be very careful about that to make sure you use the appropriate natural sort of like environment there. And then the other land, you grow crops. You grow lots of food to actually feed the people around the world.
Aha, says old scientist on YouTube, listening to this, because he writes, what about fertilizers? Because most fertilizers today are made using natural gas, aka methane. So would the animal agriculture methane emissions that we've reduced by eating less meat, would that then just move to creating fertilizer to grow the crops?
Oh, so this is a huge issue to open up. So the first thing is you have to remember that when you're thinking about, I would say, livestock, you're not just thinking about the land for the livestock. You're also thinking about the land that's been cleared to create soya, which is then produced to actually feed the livestock on the land. Okay, so you then have this double whammy, which is if you get rid of the livestock or you reduce it, you also reduce the amount of soya production you need as well. So tick, tick. But also when it comes to fertilizer, you don't need as much fertilizer as we're using now. If we use technology and we think about it very carefully, a lot of farms, and particularly the industrial farms, they just spray fertilizers. It's just like, yeah, we're going to put antibiotics in all the animals and put fertilizers everywhere because some of the plants will need it. We can be much more, I would say, careful about how much we use. The other problem is that at some point the nitrogen and the potassium fertilizer will become limited and cause the price will go up. And that's what we don't want because there's lots of small farmers around the world that really rely on having some of that fertilizer. So we need to balance the demand, but also keep the costs down so those farmers don't actually go out of business.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some great solutions to the fertilizer issue on the climate question before. I remember doing a program in Kenya where they flew drones over field that could photograph the crops and see how healthy they were, and then precision apply the fertilizer in the bits of the field that need it. So they didn't have to spray the whole field. It meant less runoff, but also less waste. So the farmers actually saved money. But anyway, let's talk about the second biggest source of human methane emissions. 38% comes from the energy sector. What is it about the energy sector that's producing so much methane?
When we produce these fossil fuels, there's leakage, there's venting, and there's even flaring.
What are these? Venting and flaring?
So leakage is you have an oil refinery and you're producing all the wonderful products that come from oil, and there's leaks. So methane leaks out, and you don't fix it. There's an incredible satellite image from a couple of years ago from a oil refinery in Kazakhstan. And they tracked that methane plume. It's just a leakage. And they calculated how much methane came out. And they worked out that the global warming caused by that one leak was the same as running 1 million petrol cars in Europe for 1 year.
Whoa.
Okay, so this is how big this issue is. Flaring is another one, which is when you have a drill rig and you're drilling oil and there's some gas there. You can legally just burn off the actual natural gas because it's difficult to capture it and you don't want it. It's in the way of the oil, so you just burn it. So literally, you can look at the North Sea and you can see these incredible oil platforms with flames just basically flaming up all the time. And so flaring happens all around the world. And this is a big problem because this could be fixed in a year. If all oil companies, the national ones and the private ones, agreed to spend the money to fix all the leaks, stop flaring, and make sure they don't vent stuff that they don't need, then all of that from the oil and gas production would sort of disappear.
Do you not need to vent and flare to stop the build-up of pressure? I think that's what the industry says, right? That they have to do this to release pressure.
Yes, in some cases. There are real safety issues, absolutely. But no, they do this routinely. At COP28, so that's the climate conference that occurred in Dubai, what was interesting was over 50 national and international oil companies actually got together. They represent about 40% of the world's production, and they signed a decarbonisation charter. So they actually did say, okay, we're going to try to achieve net zero emissions for their own companies by 2050. They're also going to get rid of leakage from their oil and gas production by 2030. And also they're going to achieve zero routine flaring. So that's just the burning of excess gas, not the safety requirement. And that's great. But the 60% of the world's production of oil and gas, don't care. Because, of course, it's an extra cost. And that hits their profit. And so therefore, what we need is really strong regulation that says, look, we need fossil fuels at this moment in time. We are going to move away. But actually, you are making the short-term issues much worse by just not dealing with methane.
I mean, whilst we're on the topic of wastage, I think we should talk about the third source, which is landfill and sewage. That's responsible for about 20% of human-caused emissions. And Jenna Brock wrote, yes, landfills also produce methane. Why is that? Where is that methane coming from?
Okay, so if you imagine all the rubbish that you produce in your home, okay, and a lot of it used to go into landfill. And if you just dump it in the ground, all the stuff that's organic will slowly break down. And because there's no oxygen in the ground, it basically breaks down to methane and not CO2. And that methane then leaks out. And this was a huge issue. So in the UK, regulation came in. And so in the 1990s, the amount of methane from our landfill and our waste production dropped markedly because the rules came in that you had to seal off the waste properly. You had to actually capture the methane. And so therefore, that part of ours and the EU's methane emissions dropped markedly. But if you think about it, there are so many countries around the world that do not have that system at the moment. And a lot of our rubbish and our recycling doesn't get processed here. It gets processed in other countries where, of course, they don't have the same regulation. Again, big issues that we can see methane. And this is the thing, you can see methane from satellites. So we can see all the waste dumps in Africa, in India, in China, producing huge amounts of methane. And again, it's one of those things that could be solved. And you really want to actually deal with waste, because the problem with waste is, again, if you have landfill, the amount of contamination that leaks into the water, whether it's from our waste electronics, whether it's from the microplastics, it's disgusting. That's why in the EU and UK, we have very strict regulations about managing waste, because you really don't want that in your water and you really don't want people to come in contact with it. But that's the biggest problem. We are exporting a lot of our issues, and then those countries don't have the infrastructure or the wealth to be able to deal with it.
We had a couple of comments on this. Quick Tip 6162 said segregation of waste and recycle or reuse. And at Stanley Kubrick 8786 said dispose of your garbage properly or don't create any in the first place. So dispose of your garbage, your rubbish properly. Using a food bin, so composting and, segregating it and then recycling. How big an emission savings would that actually do overall? So the recycling and the food bins and the composting?
It depends on the country. So the big problem is that you at home could be doing everything right. But if it then goes to the local council, who then exports some of it to another country, then you have no control over it. So I think the key thing is, firstly, we need to reduce our consumption. So again, do we need all this stuff? Okay, do we need all this packaging? Now, the EU and hopefully the UK are bringing in new packaging laws to reduce the amount of packaging. There's some incredible companies who are now making packaging out of seaweed and things like that. So there are lots of novel things. So we don't have to do the same as we did in the 1950s. We can move on, use new technology. So again, it's reduce our consumption. And then when we consume, try to consume with sustainable brands. And then when you do get waste, make sure you understand the local government guidelines so you separate it all out. And then government needs to regulate.
How is the world getting on with putting all of that into action? Where are we with methane today?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask me that question. So unfortunately, methane levels are still going up. And we haven't turned the corner. It's interesting because in CO2 terms, that emissions have sort of flattened out. We flattened the curve. But with methane, it's still rising. So again, what we need to do is get a lot of international agreements in place. I'm also going to add another one that people may not know, which is coal. Mining of coal also produces a lot of methane, and a lot of the methane from coal production is coming from China. So that's another quick win because, of course, coal is also the dirtiest fuel. It's the most inefficient fossil fuel. And therefore, countries like the UK have literally got rid of it from our energy mix completely. So therefore, if we can help the rest of the world move away from coal, even if it's into natural gas as a transitional fuel, before we get to renewables, which we should jump straight to, then guess what? That's going to make a big difference. So, I'm going to throw coal mining in there as another way of ceasing production of fossil fuels, but also huge amounts of methane.
Professor Mark Maslin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
Pleasure, and I hope you have me back.
And thank you for watching. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the BBC World Service YouTube channel so you don't miss a thing.
And as you've seen today, we love hearing from you. So do comment any questions or queries below. I'm Greg Jackson.
And I'm Jordan Dunbar, and we'll see you next time.